Okay, let's start off with what is a computer? What is a computer? It's really simple. It's just a simple machine, but it's a new type of machine. The gears, the pistons, have been replaced with electrons. How many of you have ever seen an electron? That's the problem with computers, is that you can't get your hands on the actual things that are moving around. You can't see them, and so they tend to be very intimidating because in a very small space there's billions of electrons running around, and we can't really get a hold on exactly what they look like. Computers are very adaptive. It's a very adaptive machine. We can move the electrons around differently to different places, depending upon the current state of affairs, the results of the last time we moved the electrons around. Best way to understand is probably an analogy. Take the electric motor. The electric motor was first invented in the late 1800s, and when it was first invented, it was only possible to build a very, very large one, which meant that it could only be cost justified for very large applications, and therefore electric motors did not proliferate very fast at all. But the real breakthrough was the invention of the fractional horsepower electric motor. We could then bring the horsepower directly to where it was needed and cost justify it on a totally individual application. And I think there's about 55 or so fractional horsepower motors now in every household. Third thing about computers, they're really dumb. They're exceptionally simple, but they're really fast. The raw instructions that we have to feed these little microprocessors, even the raw instructions that we have to feed these giant Cray 1 supercomputers, are the most trivial of instructions. They're get some data from here, get a number from here, fetch a number, add two numbers together, test to see if it's bigger than 0, go put it over there. It's the most mundane thing you could ever imagine. But the key thing about it is that, let's say I could move 100 times faster than anyone in here. In the blink of your eye, I could run out there and I could grab a bouquet of fresh spring flowers or something, and I could run back in here and I could snap my fingers, and you'd all think I was a magician or something. And yet, I was basically doing a series of really simple instructions, moving, running out there, grabbing some flowers, running back, snapping my fingers, but I could just do them so fast that you would think that there was something magical going on. It's the exact same way with the computer. What we do is we take these very, very simple instructions, and we, by building a collection of these things, build a higher level instruction. So instead of saying turn right, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, extend hand, grab flowers, run back, I can say, could you go get some flowers? Could you pour a cup of coffee? And we have started in the last 20 years to deal with computers in higher and higher levels of abstraction. But ultimately, these levels of abstraction get translated down into these stupid instructions that run really fast. What we've got now is we are putting a lot of computers out that are made to be used pretty much in what we call a standalone mode. One person, one computer. But it isn't very long before you get a community of users using these things that really want to hook them all together. Because ultimately a computer is going to be a tool for communication. So they want to hook them together and communicate. What is a computer program? Do you know what a computer program is? Anybody? No? Sort of? Sort of. It's an odd thing. It's really an odd thing. You've never seen an electron, but computer programs have no physical manifestation at all. They're simply ideas expressed on paper. Computer programs are archetypal. By 86, 87, pick a year, people are going to be spending more time interacting with these machines than they do interacting with their big automobile machines today. People are going to be spending 2-3 hours a day sometimes interacting with these machines, longer than they spend in a car. And so the industrial design, the software design, and how people interact with these things certainly must be given the consideration that we give automobiles today, if not a lot more. And if you take a look, what we've got is we've got a situation where most of the automobiles are not being designed in the United States, Europe, Japan. Televisions, audio, electronics, watches, cameras, bicycles, calculators, you name it. Most of the objects of our life are not designed in America. We've blown it. We've blown it from an industrial point of view because we've lost the markets to the foreign competitors. Over half of the gross national product is contributed by companies and people that are already in the information business today. And that's true. Most of the people that got laid off from General Motors are never going to go back to work at General Motors. Ever, ever, ever. And unless we retrain them and give them skills, they're going to burn the cities down. And that's one of the biggest problems facing us right now. It's real easy to talk high tech. It's real hard to take all these guys that have been putting fenders on for 15 years, servicing computers. It's going to be really hard, and we're not paying enough attention to it right now. But we're already in the information age. We're already there now. Most of us manipulate information for a living. We're solving the problems of injecting some liberal arts into these computers. That's what we're trying to do right now. Let's get proportionally spaced fonts in there. Let's get multiple fonts in there. Let's get graphics in there so that we can deal in pictures. And let's get to the point where 3 years from now, when there is going to be no college student 3 or 4 years from now that's ever going to think of writing a paper without one of these things. Just like they will not think of going to a science class without a calculator today. And where we've got to get to is where people 3-4 years from now are using these things and they go, wasn't this the way it always was? That's where we're trying to get to now. The reason Apple exists is because we stumbled on to fractional horsepower computing 5 years before anybody else. That's the reason we exist. We took these microprocessor chips, which is sort of a computer on a chip, and we surrounded it with all the other stuff you need to interact with a computer. And we made a computer that was about 13 pounds. And people would look at it and they'd say, well, where's the computer? This is just a terminal. And we'd say, no, that is the computer. And after about 5 minutes of repeating this, finally a light bulb would go on in their minds. And they'd decide if they didn't like it, they could throw it out the window or run over it with their car. But that this was the entire computer. That's why we exist. Fractional horsepower computing. This fractional horsepower computing has created a revolution. It was invented in 1976, the first personal computer. This year, in 1983, the industry is going to ship over 3 million of the little buggers. 3 million. By 1986, we're going to ship more computers than automobiles in this country. Now, Apple's strategy is really simple. What we want to do is we want to put an incredibly great computer in a book that you can carry around with you that you can learn how to use in 20 minutes. That's what we want to do, and we want to do it this decade. And we really want to do it with a radio link in it, so you don't have to hook up to anything. You're in communication with all these larger databases and other computers. We don't know how to do that now. It's impossible technically. So we had 3 options. One was to do nothing. And as I mentioned, we're all pretty young and impatient, so that was not a good option. The second one was to put a piece of garbage computer in a book. And we can do that, but our competitors are doing that, and so we don't need to do that. The third option was to design the computer that we want to put into the book eventually, even though we can't put it into the book now. And right now, it fits in a bread box, and it's $10,000, and it's called Lisa. And it just so turns out that, fortunately, there is a giant office market out there that is buying these things a lot faster than we can make them. We're sold out for the next year. And we'll sell over $100 million of those things the first year. So, fortunately, there's an office marketplace where enhancing personal productivity is absolutely worth $10,000 a person. And they're gobbling these things up, and they will pay for the development of this new technology. The next thing we will do is we will find a way to put it in a shoebox and sell it for like $2,500. And that'll be the next step. And finally, we'll find a way to get it in a book and sell it for under $1,000. Software is information, and the information is expressed with a bunch of ones and zeros. And what we do now is we take those ones and zeros and we encode them magnetically on this piece of mylar with a bunch of gook on the surface of it that remembers the ones and zeros. We take it, we put it in a package with a manual, we take that, we put it on a truck, we ship it to a dealer, they take it out of the truck, they put it on the shelf, it sits there for a while, costing them money. A customer comes in, peruses them, and picks one out, takes it home, shoves it in their computer, and it translates it back to electrical impulses of ones and zeros. Now, that's a pretty long path. Where we'll be going is transmitting this stuff electronically over the phone line. So our strategy right now is, let's write some programs that are generic. That sort of, we'll write 90% of the program, and you fill in the last 10% of the blanks. A perfect example of that's a word processor. A word processor can be used to write a business letter, a report for a college exam. It can be used to write a correspondence letter to your friend. Same word processor. We write it once, millions of people use it. Another program, there's a lot of database programs. There's some spreadsheet modeling programs where we do 90% of the work, these are the other 10. Okay, let's go back to this revolution. What is happening? What's happening is the personal computer is a new medium of communication, one of the media. And so what's a medium? It's a technology of communication. A book is a medium. Telephone, radio, television. These are mediums of communication. And each medium has pitfalls to it, has shortcomings, has boundaries which you can't cross, but it also generally has some new unique opportunities. The neat thing is that each medium shapes not only the communication that goes through it, but it shapes the process of communication. When I talk on a telephone with anyone, we both have to be on the phone at the same time. When I'm working or when I want to send something to somebody with a computer terminal, I want to do a drawing and zip it over and put it in their mailbox, they don't need to be there. They can retrieve it 3 days later. They can be in New York and retrieve it. One of these days when we have portable computers with radio links, they can be walking around Aspen and retrieve it. And so the process of communication itself changes as the mediums evolve. So what I'm claiming is that computers are a medium, and that personal computers are a new and different medium from large computers. What happens when a new medium enters the scene is that we tend to fall back into old media habits. And let's look at a few transitions from one medium to another. Radio to television, television to this incredible new interactive medium of the video disc. If you go back and you look at the first television shows, they're basically radio shows with a television camera pointed at them. And it took us the better part of the 50s to really understand how television was going to come into its own as its own medium. And I really think the first time that a lot of people were shook into realizing that television had come of age was the JFK funeral. The nation, a lot of the world, experienced the JFK funeral in their living room at a level of intensity that wouldn't have been possible with radio. I think another more upbeat example was the Apollo landing. That experience was not possible with the previous medium, and yet it took us the better part of 20 years for that one to really evolve. Let's look at the next transition. We have this optical video disc which can store 55,000 images on a side for an hour of video, randomly accessible. What are we using it for? Movies. We're dropping back into the old media habits. And there's a few experiments, though, that are starting to happen, and you start to believe that 5 years, 10 years from now, that's going to come into its own. A neat experiment happened right here in Aspen. MIT came out to Aspen about 4 or 5 years, I think about 4 years ago, and they had this truck with this camera on it, and they went down every single street, photographed every single intersection in every single street in Aspen. They photographed all the buildings. And they've got this computer and this video disc hooked up together, and on the screen, you see yourself looking down a street, and you can touch the screen, and there's some arrows on the screen, and you can touch walk forward. And all of a sudden, it's just like you're walking forward in the street. And you get to an intersection, and you can stop, and you can look right, and you can look straight, and you can look left. And you can decide which way you want to go. You can even go in some of the shops. It's an electronic map that gives you the feeling you're walking through Aspen. Then there's 4 little buttons in the corner, because they came back and they did exactly the same thing all 4 seasons. So you can be looking down a street, hit winter, all of a sudden you get the same street with 3 feet of snow on it. It's really amazing. That's not incredibly useful, but it points to some of the interactive nature of this new medium, which is just starting to break out from movies, and it's going to take another 5 to 10 years to evolve. They all speak different languages right now. And I heard a funny story. We've talked a lot with AT&T, American Bell, etc. And there's a funny story about this is a true story. I talked to this old guy who was about 80 years old, and he was one of the original telephone installers. And he would go out and he'd install telephones in people in farmhouses, and they've never seen anything like this. And it takes 2 wires. He'd run the 2 wires down, and he'd hook up the phone. And he was out installing this phone for this Italian family in this farm. And he finished installing the phone, and the guy asked him, well, can I speak Italian on this phone? And he said, why didn't you tell me? I got to run a 3rd wire. It'll be $50 extra. So that's where we are today. The privacy issue. Okay. I guess what I see now is an incredible amount of information, but not a very great ability to distill any sort of knowledge or wisdom out of that information. We are all bombarded with information every day, and our ability to turn all that information, to filter it to what we're interested in, and to turn it into something useful to us, into some knowledge, is very low. So I think if we're really interested in a distributed society where the ability to understand things and the ability to distill information, knowledge from information, is possessible by everyone, the first thing we've got to do is give tools to people to help them do that. Because right now, those tools are centralized. You see what I'm saying? So I think the first step towards ensuring that we don't get a concentration of something that you don't want is to distribute that intelligence, if you will, that can turn all this information into some sort of knowledge for us, so that we can get on and we can look at any congressional testimony that has to do with gun control, any journal articles published, any newspaper articles published, so that I can come home and on a weekend peruse the weekly outpouring of information, but put a filter on it, because I'm only interested in gun control. And I can find out that my congressman gave some testimony last week about gun control that I didn't agree with, so I can get on and write him a pretty nasty letter and zing it on the email system and make sure that at least one of his aides will read it tomorrow. Voice recognition is it's going to be the better part of a decade away. We can do toy voice recognition now. The problem is it isn't just recognizing the voice. When you talk to somebody, understanding language is much harder than understanding voice. We can sort out the words, but what do they all mean? And most language is exceptionally contextually driven. In other words, one word means something in this context, it means something entirely different in another context. And when you're talking to somebody, people interact. It's not a one-way communication. It's going, yep, 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 and they gracefully interact. They go in and out of levels of detail. And boy, this stuff's hard. I don't know how much time we have. I think I'm about to. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.